Well, the Kremlin has said that it is waiting for Ukraine to respond to Russia's proposal of a three-day ceasefire from May 8th to 10th. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has criticized Vladimir Putin's offer, saying the ceasefire is too short and there is no reason to wait for May 8th. Let's get more on this with Professor Scott Lucas, founder and editor of EA Worldview. Scott, good to have you on the program with us once again. Now, firstly, what do you make of Vladimir Putin's offer of those 3 days of ceasefire? Questions are coming over, why not have it now and why not make it a permanent one?
You're absolutely right that Vladimir Putin's so-called offer of a ceasefire is a PR diversion. And the obvious issue is, look, if you really want a ceasefire, especially since Ukraine is proposing a 30-day interim ceasefire, just accept it now. Why give yourself another 10 days to continue your bombing and killing of civilians following the mass murder of 12 in Kyiv last week? Why continue the drone attacks on civilians? Why continue the attacks on the front lines if you're serious about this? And the answer as to why did Putin actually do this is twofold. One is that the Kremlin lost the diplomatic initiative last week when, having had the U.S. present a proposal to Ukraine which had a lot of its demands in it, they carried out this attack I referred to on Kyiv with 70 missiles, 145 drones. And it was so shocking, and the headlines were so vivid, that you saw Donald Trump, after seeing Volodymyr Zelenskyy, actually criticize Vladimir Putin. So Putin's trying to recover the initiative, including with his best asset in Washington. And secondly, is to cover the Kremlin's demands on other fronts. Just in the past 48 hours, Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, has not only restated the Kremlin's ultimatum against Ukraine, he's gone even further. Ukraine must give up Crimea and 4 regions, all of 4 regions in the country, even though Russia does not control parts of those 4 regions. Ukraine must not join NATO. Ukraine must not have effective security guarantees. In other words, rather than showing a willingness to negotiate and talk, the Kremlin is doubling down on the demands effectively to try to conquer Ukraine.
Yes, you just talked about Kursk. I mean, are we to believe, Vladimir Putin's account from the weekend that, Russian forces have pretty much regained control over the territory from Ukrainian forces?
I think Russian forces have almost all of Kursk, but not necessarily that region in Western Russia that Ukraine has controlled part of after a surprise attack last August. What Putin wanted to be able to do is on May 9th, which is Russian Victory Day from World War II, is to present the idea we have all of our territory back. And that's another reason why he issued the ceasefire, the sham ceasefire call. He was going to link that to Kursk and say, look, we're the guys who are winning. Now you have to negotiate with us. Problem here is that it's not just a question of what Trump does. Ukraine's getting more support from Europe and indeed from countries like Australia to take a firmer line with the Russians. And so I don't think the Kremlin can impose a settlement, even if it regains all of its territory.
Yeah, so even if it's not interested in that, do you believe that basically, Vladimir Putin is just basically ruling out any hopes of a permanent ceasefire, let alone a 30-day one that Kiev is asking for?
The only permanent ceasefire you get, which is effectively an end to this full-scale invasion after 38 months, is if Putin thinks he has achieved his objectives. And again, those objectives are to take 25% of Ukraine and to have the international community recognize it, to have sanctions lifted on Moscow, to have U.S. investment and partnership with the Russians, and to have Ukraine effectively crippled with no hope of having a strong military, no hope of strong relationships with other countries, be it in Europe or around the world. Only if he achieves that does he say, we stop.
Now, as you mentioned before, Donald Trump, he is clearly irritated by the Kremlin's reluctance to stop the fighting. So do you think Donald Trump will be forced in a different direction, away from the boardroom, more towards the front lines?
I think there's a broader story here, and I think you have to actually go into the Trump administration, which is split over this. We know that one faction, which has no interest in European security or Ukraine security, is J.D. Vance, the vice president. It's Trump's envoy to Russia, the real estate developer Steve Witkoff. Now, they had the upper hand until a few days ago, but because the Kremlin overplayed their hand, it meant that others in the Trump administration, Keith Kellogg, the envoy to Ukraine, and importantly, the national security Mike Waltz, who was with Trump last weekend at the Vatican, they favor some support for Ukraine and still some interaction with Europe, and they don't want to see as being in the Kremlin's pocket. So they're pushing back. Now, which faction gets the upper hand in those discussions within the Trump administration?
Yeah. And do you think Ukraine's cause could be helped by revelations from the Ukrainian President Zelenskyy today that the U.S. deal to develop Ukraine's critical minerals industry has become, quote, stronger and more equitable?
I think you can get a confirmation of that deal. It definitely increases Ukraine's leverage. First of all, what Zelenskyy means by the deal being stronger is that far from the U.S. just taking control 100% of the profits from those minerals, they'll be split between Ukraine and the United States, and Ukraine will not have to repay the aid that it's given under the Biden administration. So that's why Zelensky's more welcoming of the deal. And of course, if you do get a deal with the U.S., it means they're invested in Ukraine. You cannot invest in the rare earth minerals and then not be interested in Ukraine's security. So the two are linked for Zelenskyy.
Yes. And Scott, earlier on in the interview, you spoke about the devastation from those drone strikes. I mean, it's become such a feature both as an offensive weapon for Ukraine and mostly for Russia. There are countermeasures being deployed as well against these drones. But what does it tell us about the state of this seemingly never-ending conflict?
Well, there's sort of two aspects to this. If you talk about the Russian nightly missile and drone attacks, but for example, 100 drones that were fired overnight, some of them are getting through. Ukraine's air defenses are a bit overstretched, and so now you're seeing more deaths, more injuries, more damage from drones. And Russia's going to continue to try to do that. The Ukraine drone strikes are a little bit more interesting in Russia in that they're not targeting civilians, they're targeting specific military sites and supporting sites like oil refineries, for example, and they are working. They are hindering Russia. There was an attack 2 nights ago on a microelectronics factory that produces these vital chips for the Russia's military. So it means that the simple narrative Russia is winning, it's more complex than that. Russia is carrying out those attacks in Ukraine, but Ukraine has the ability, if it continues to get international support, to be able to hinder Russia's invasion and cause some damage inside Russia.
Okay, Professor Scott Lucas, we always appreciate your analysis on this program. Thank you so much.
Thank you.